reason why there's such an opportunity here is because it's such a fragmented market. There's kind of three things that I kind of call my three pillars. One is,
you mentioned you like accounting firms, but like, is there a certain type of criteria that you look for when you're acquiring business? Because
Meet Ben Kelly. To date, he has acquired 7 businesses with little to zero money down that generates him over $750,000 a year. In addition, he is the founder of Acquisition Ace.
I'm curious for you, when you approach a business, how do you go about valuation? And is there a specific valuation you look for?
Yeah, so typically, and also I want to make it clear, I'm not a guy like, I'm not some social media guru who's going to tell you like anybody can do it, 3 easy steps.
How are you approaching off market?
Yeah, great question. So off market is where.
Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it, Art and Michael, having been on the podcast. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I mean, like Michael said earlier, we've been following your content and definitely intrigued what you're doing. So we can't wait to learn more.
Your pedigree here will say you spent some time at JP Morgan, but you left because you wanted to be an entrepreneur and not an employee, which I absolutely relate to. And it's safe to say in your scenario, you've succeeded pretty darn well. And I'm just curious if you could share a little bit more about your journey of what took you from making that decision to where you are today.
Yeah, and so the journey kind of started even pre-JP Morgan. I was a military intelligence officer in the Army for 4 years. And as I was getting out, I got my MBA. And the idea that I always had was, looking back on how I grew up, my father, he was very much a typical W-2 employee. And I had a big family. There's 6 of us, of my kids in the family. And so my parents, we were just barely making it. And my dad decided to take a risk and pretty much do what he was doing as an employee, but then do it for himself, right? So he just took the same skill set, moved literally outside the office building, started doing it as a 1099 contractor, and he went from making like $20,000 a year to like $200,000 a year, right? So it showed me, and all of a sudden now we got a house. All of a sudden now we're not driving, these jalopies around, and I saw just a very basically the results of taking that step. And so now fast forward, I'm back to getting out of the Army, got my MBA. I get recruited by JP Morgan because they were doing it like a big, back when I was getting out, they were doing a big rush to get a lot of these military officers that were coming out and bring them into the bank. And so I came in, went over to the private bank and what I thought I wanted to do. And I looked at all of my colleagues that I worked with. They were all 15, 20 years my senior, and saw, they drove a nice car. Yeah, they had nice houses but then I saw the day that it really hit me was when one of my colleagues, who was like 20 years ahead of me as a senior, been there forever, done an amazing job. And he actually had just closed one of the biggest deals that year, the biggest deal that year, which was bringing in $2 billion into the bank from this guy who just sold his car dealership network to Warren Buffett, right? So he got that guy as a client. He brings him into the bank. Everyone loves him because he brings in a huge billions of dollars worth of money. And then a couple of months later, he's like asking for 3 weeks off to go do something, and he was denied because of whatever. Right. And so at that point, I was just like, okay, this guy just brought this bank billions of dollars. Yeah. And yet he's still going in there and kind of walking into his superior's office, make sure everything's good, and kind of like begging for time off to go take his family on vacation. And they tell him no. And so at that point, I was like, okay, I see the writing on the wall. I see that there's a limit here. No matter how much money I get paid as a salary, I don't control my time.
Right.
And that is the most valuable thing that all of us have, is our time.
Yeah.
Can't get it back. And so how do I go about maximizing my time while also building wealth for my family? And I think that's what kind of got me to finally take that step away from JP Morgan and jump into that.
Amazing. And then from there, would you share quickly your, what was the first business you bought, and then maybe stack on top of that what other ones you're currently in?
Yeah. So the first one I did was a SaaS deal. And that one was a little bit different than my subsequent deals, because that was back when I was just learning about how to do acquisitions. And so I had really no idea. I wasn't ready to jump into utilizing the SBA or anything else like that. I just kind of wanted to see if there's a way I could try to do an off-market deal.
Okay.
And so I went on LinkedIn, spent months just networking. I think I probably jumped on 5 to 10 LinkedIn calls a week, just connecting with people. And eventually just more and more business owners, and asking them about how they like running their business and are they interested in selling. And there was one guy, and this is when I lived out in Phoenix, One guy I connected with, he was local. He had a SaaS company, also an Army veteran. And so we just met for coffee. And he talked about, it was a totally different topic. We were actually talking about a franchise that his wife owned. And in that topic, he mentioned that he also has a SaaS company that had started pretty much a year and a half ago. It was small. It was doing about $10,000 a month in monthly recurring revenue. And he was great at the tech side of it, but he didn't know how to grow it. And he wanted to raise money, didn't know how to do that. And I said, you know what? Show me the product. He shows me the product. It's an amazing product. I was like, you know what? I think I can help you raise money. I think I can help put this together and kind of help you grow.
Yeah.
And so that I kind of came in, I was 5,000 into it. And I was able to come on as a partner with him.
Amazing.
And we scaled that from where it was to like 18 months later. Instead of 10, we went from 10K a month in recurring revenue to almost 100K a month.
Amazing.
Revenue. And we scaled it. So still have that company today. We're actually looking in the next year to potentially exit. Okay. But yeah, that was my first one. And awesome. That kind of showed me, look, I came in with very little amount of money. And at the time I didn't have that much saved up anyway. So it was the only way I could do it. And it showed me like, then, a year later, I'm making 6 figures a year from this deal.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that was hugely powerful.
And were you doing that one on the side though still? Was it?
Yeah, that's still very much going on. I spend about probably 30 minutes to an hour a week on that deal. I still technically am the CFO. So I do look at the financials. I do talk to investors that have invested into the deal, but that's kind of the role.
And when you got involved in that one, were you also still with JP, or were you you'd left?
I was still at JP Morgan, still working for JP Morgan full time.
So a side hustle, if you will.
Correct. It was very much a side hustle, and and it really cut my teeth into doing something on the acquisition side while still working a full-time job and seeing that it was possible to do that.
That's great. So then from there, you swallowed up a few more businesses. What did that look like?
Yeah. So after that was a nail salon out in Phoenix. I partnered with another partner on that. That was $0 of my own money into it. What I did with that one was I found the deal. I pretty much got it all set up, the financing, everything, brought in an operating partner who would be the person. Now, he doesn't even run the day-to-day, but they had a GM that managed the day-to-day, but he would be the person that was talking with the GM and meeting with them.
Yeah.
And so structured that deal in a way, exited that one last year. Then after that, we go ATM route, did that again with 2 partners. Again, zero money down of my own, very much kind of structure the deal. ATM deals are interesting because you can't, typically you can't get financing for them. Banks will not lend on an ATM route because they see it as kind of like a cash-based business. They get very wary of like knowing exactly how the money's being used. And a lot of times these are owned by mom and pop type owners, and they're not run very professionally. And so they show like no profit on their tax returns, even though they're making a lot of money. So anyway, banks have kind of written them off for a while. But we were able to find one that had super clean books. The person ran it professionally, and we spent like a year finding a bank that would actually do it because it was a larger deal. And we got it across. So I think it's the first SBA loan that's been used on an ATM business. 20 years, like something like that. We got it done. So yeah, that was cool. That one was fun because everyone told us we couldn't do it, and it was cool finally figuring out how to do it.
That's great. You showed them.
And then we did I have a web design company that was more of a consulting for equity, where I kind of came in and said, hey, I'll help you grow it. Took over a significant portion of that company. Operator still in place, doing the day-to-day. After that, a financial services company. Then we have then recently an accounting firm out in Western Kentucky. Did that with 2 partners. Again, no money into the deal. That one was structured in a way where accounting firms are kind of my sweet. I have a sweet tooth for accounting firms. I like accounting firms a lot. Yeah. And that deal is growing and doing great. We're looking at multiple acquisitions. That's kind of my first roll-up strategy is going to be accounting firms.
That's awesome.
So looking to do another probably 20 acquisitions in the space in the next 2 years as a whole on accounting firms.
Incredible.
And then recently I was a partner in a deal for a drilling company that drills holes horizontally for utilities. to be put down, utility lines and everything else in the Carolinas. So, and then we have a couple more on the docket. So anyway, I may have missed one, but that's kind of what I got going on.
Very wide ranging industries and businesses. I'm curious, Ben. I mean, we were talking about this very quickly, you were kind of describing, you found the deal, you did this, you did this. How did you go about educating yourself on how to actually do those things that you talked about?
Good question. A lot of trial and error. A lot of, I think the strength that got me to where I am now in this space was I just started connecting with everyone who was way ahead of me in the space. And I have on my calendar, I'm even this week, I probably have about 4 or 5 meetings on my calendar that are not business meetings. They're more just networking in the industries I'm looking at. And I'm trying to make as many connections, learn as much as I can. And so I reach out to, if someone's really good at off-market sourcing, I'm reaching out to the best guy and I'm having conversations with them and figuring out what they're doing. And then I go out and I test it, and I test it again and again and again until I actually have a product that can produce consistent results. And so for me, when I know I might say like, oh yeah, I found a company and did this and that, but finding that company might have took 6 months of like an hour a day, going out and talking to hundreds of brokers, looking at thousands of listings, and finally getting one that fit the model I was looking at, right? So now this is over 5 years, all the things I just said. So this is now getting to the point where I built up a network where now deals are coming to me because people know that I can close on deals. They know that I have a bunch of people now in my network. And so I get sent deals a lot. So a lot of the work I had to do in the beginning of just the grunt work of going out and shaking every tree that I could to see what fell out. Now I'll get messages constantly about like, hey, here's this deal, here's that deal. Would you be interested? So it's definitely easier now for sure.
Nice. And is there, obviously you mentioned you like accounting firms, but is there a certain type of criteria that you look for when you're acquiring business? Because it's so all over the place. Like when you mentioned some of the ones that you have, I don't know, maybe in your mind, no, you're like, no, they all connect this way, but what do you look for?
Yeah. So, okay, there's kind of 3 things that I have that I kind of call my 3 pillars. One is I want something that's recession resistant. And that doesn't mean that it's not affected by a recession or a depression, because almost every business is. But if I look at 2008, if I look at some of the dips that we've had in the economy, I can look at that data and I can see what industries really suffered, right? And you can go and like a lot of these loans are SBA backed, which means they're government loans, and the data on default rates is right there for the public to look at these. Mm-hmm. And you can see what industries really suffered and which industries did okay. And so I want something that is an essential service that is recession resistant. So that's one. Second is going to be, I want something that has a potential of having recurring revenue. So not necessarily MRR, like monthly recurring revenue, more of if you give a customer a great experience, they're coming back again and again multiple times in a year, right? So bring on one happy customer, they're going to be paying you for the future. And some things like, for instance, I don't touch construction. If someone wanted to do, like, you might have an amazing construction company that does kitchen remodels, they're making millions of dollars a year. Yeah, I don't care. I'm not touching it. It's not because it's bad business. It's just because for me, that is something where I don't feel confident that if I do someone's kitchen for $50,000, they might not need another kitchen for another 10 years, right? So like I have to constantly be going out, and that's then very dependent on market factors that I don't control. And so I stay away from that. And the last one is, does it have a moat? Does it have a barrier to entry? Because, for instance, like landscaping companies are a great example. A small landscaping company has like no moat. Anyone can buy a mower at Home Depot and just go and mow someone's lawn. And then it's a price to the bottom, like a race to the bottom. Everyone's like lower price, lower price, lower price, trying to steal each other's customers. A larger landscaping company that's getting out, it's over $1 million in revenue. They're doing larger HOAs, commercial work. That actually has a barrier to entry because the guy, the gym across the street who bought a mower can't go out and do these larger jobs. He doesn't have the infrastructure to do it. So certain industries, it's a size thing. Once they get past a certain size, now they have a moat. But I like things like, if we mentioned accounting firms, they, typically a lot of these guys have licenses if they're doing now, they don't necessarily need that, but we can get into that in a little bit. But you also need experience. You need expertise and training on how to do these things. And it's something that when we talk about recession resistance, taxes aren't going anywhere, right? So I like industries that are very simple. Everyone understands what they do. They're boring. And I know that if I were to invest in one, it's going to be here 5 years from now, doing what it's doing. So that's kind of my criteria.
These days, do you look at it through any sort of different lens with AI and how AI might impact those businesses?
Yeah, I do. Like, people have asked me that a lot about accounting firms. Like, how is AI going to affect that? And there are certain things like bookkeeping, for instance, that I can see AI putting a dent in for sure. We're still far enough away in AI right now, at least from what I can tell, where there's going to have to be like legislative action in certain industries. Because, for instance, if I go into taxes AI,
Mm-hmm.
I just put in my here's my bank accounts, here's my stuff, do my taxes for me, and this thing goes in and it does your taxes, and at the end of it, it says sign here, and I sign right there. Great. Well, like now at that point, like if it comes back, I get audited. Who's liable? Like I guess I'm liable, right? Because I signed it, but I didn't know. Like I can't
Right.
blame the AI. Like it's not something that can
Right.
take
Can you
accountability
go
for.
after
And so
ChatGPT? Yeah, exactly.
correct. There has to be legislation that allows for like that liability, right? Of that. So right now, my CPA signs, right, saying that they certify that this is correct. So if something comes back, I can always say, hey, look, this guy over here said it was correct. That's where I still feel good about accounting in general, but there are definitely going to be industries, especially content, things like that. You can already tell that AI is getting better and better and better. So I think that there is going to be disruption. You have to be watching out for it.
Yeah. Us, Art and I, coming from media industry, as you talk content writing, all that, it's pretty crazy as we look at some of the stuff now. And it's going to be really interesting to see how it evolves.
Yeah. I mean, the tech is already there.
Yeah.
It's the politics and the unions that are slowing it down.
Yeah. In many ways. Yeah. Although some of the video content creation stuff you see, you're still getting extra fingers, but it's advancing. It's advancing. I'm curious for you, when you approach a business, how do you go about valuation? And is there a specific valuation you look for?
Yeah. So typically in small businesses, we're going between a 2 and a 4x of SDE, which stands for Seller Discretionary Earnings, which is basically the total cash flow that's coming to that owner. Now, it's different than net profit. It's different than EBITDA. And this is for companies that are typically less than $1 million a year in cash flow, right? So these are your smaller companies, and you're gonna go from a 2x to a 4x. Now, a 2x company is going to be a company where the owner's doing almost all the work, right? We all know these types of companies is pretty much you got your main guy. He's maybe got a couple assistants, but he's doing the sales. He's doing the marketing. He's the guy running everything. He's working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. The reason why that's a 2X is because if I buy that company, I have to either buy the job and do what he's doing, or I have to go out there and find someone to replace him, which then cuts into my cash flow. And so that's a less valuable business. On the other side, if you're a 4X business, think of it almost like turnkey. There's a GM who's running the day-to-day. He's got a great team, great systems and processes. The owner currently is working 5-10 hours a week. He comes in, he checks on people. Maybe he does some works on some big picture stuff. With that type of company, I can buy it and easily just switch in and out for what he's doing. And everything stays the same on the day-to-day. So typically 2 to 4X the SDE. Okay. Now, SDE, like I said, is cash flow. It's all the stuff that the owner was using the business for as a kind of like his personal piggy bank. So if he was taking money from the business to go and buy at least a car, go on vacation, go out and go to the movies, all that gets added back in, called it add back, gets all added back into a number that says this is the total compensation the owner truly had. And you take that and you would use it between a 2 and a 4X typically. Now, there are certain industries like accounting, going back to why I like accounting firms, where it's not priced off 2 to 4X SDE. It's priced off the previous year's revenue is how they get their valuation. So an accounting firm that did $1 million last year is priced around $1 million. And typically accounting firms in that size are doing between 40 and 50% profit margin.
Okay, nice.
And so now if you're looking at it, if you're going to go buy, if you had $1 million purchase, one's an accounting firm and one's a plumbing company. The accounting firm, for that $1 million, I'm probably going to get $400,000 to $500,000 cash flow, right? Where that plumbing company, I'm probably getting around $250,000 worth of cash flow, right? So that's why more bang for your buck as you're looking at this.
Very interesting. And for you, did you think that your experience, in JP Morgan helped you at all with accounting, or did it really matter for you?
Didn't matter at all.
No. Yeah.
The only thing that I'm very thankful for the time that I had at JP Morgan. Yeah. Because what it exposed me to was that most of the people that in the private bank that were, because we didn't deal with anybody, like we didn't manage anyone's money that didn't have at least $10 million in liquid net worth.
Yeah.
Right.
Got it.
So these are all very high net worth people. And I saw that a majority of them didn't make it through stock, didn't make it through all these different types. They made it through owning businesses and acquiring businesses. And I saw them doubling and
Yeah.
tripling their net worth in a year because they go out and make an acquisition. So I saw it firsthand.
Yeah.
And
Incredible.
so that's kind of where I saw like this is the way to truly go and build wealth in a sustainable and fairly fast way.
Yeah. It's so interesting too, because it's, I think different people have heard or will read sometimes those studies that say that. But I think when you live it, like when you're seeing that day in and day out, it's like it just reinforces like, gosh, if you want to find yourself down a pathway of this, and this is the best way to do it. You mentioned, like, it sounds like a lot of the businesses that you've acquired, and maybe this is just by their nature of, as you warmed up to it, and now some acquisitions are getting even larger for you, but it seemed like they were not really large companies. And I'm curious, do you prefer smaller ones? Because I know sometimes when you get larger companies, the benefit you get is if you're still going to have to pay out for marketing, if you're still going to pay out for that, like the larger company or hire people, you do have more of that SDE, if you will, to redeploy. But do you have a preference about what you go after?
Yes, I do. And I would say it's definitely larger. Go
Okay.
larger if you can. I would much rather, because one, the difference between buying a $4 million company and a $1 million company, in terms of the amount of time and effort and just pain to get through the process, is exactly the same, right? So that doesn't change. So, but your SDE at the end of it is drastically different, right? So if you're going to go through the pain and the suffering and all of the focus you need to do for 6 to 9 months to get a deal done, go larger. And you're also, it's going to be less risky, right? A larger company is going to have larger amounts of revenue. It's going to have larger amounts of cash flow. It's going to be probably around much longer, right? It's probably been around for 15, 20 years. It's gone through multiple cycles. It has multiple people that have redundancies inside the team structures. It's going to be something where if you lose a big client or two after the transition, you're going to be fine. Whereas $1 million company, if they lost a couple contracts, you could be getting close to not being able to pay your debt service, right? So I always push people, if you can, and to utilize creative structuring to go for that larger deal.
Do you have a minimum cash flow that you look for, or SDE, I should say?
Yeah. Yep. So I'm not looking at anything that's below 500K in SDE. Preferably more above 750, 800.
Sure.
And that's for me personally. Now, for a lot of my people that I work with, I would say typically they're looking, the minimum is like 250 and above they're looking for.
Which to me seems like, because what I do find is like some of the ones you described, when it's above 500, especially when you get above 750, you start potentially getting into the competition with, who knows, it could be people like yourself these days in some of it, but for, I would say, the private equity and that sort of stuff will come sometimes. Have you found that to be much of a challenge, or not as much because there's so many businesses coming on the market because boomers are starting to retire?
I think twofold. Yes. There's so much businesses coming onto the market. It's incredible. Like, people have a hard time understanding, like, there is 13 million businesses that need to exchange hands in the next decade, right? So there is just a vast number of businesses that are coming on the market. Very few buyers. Yeah. Now, typically private equity is really not touching, like, you're not going to be competing with private equity until you really get over the $1.5 million, $2 million EBITDA mark.
Okay.
That's where they start to get very interested, because it has economies of scale. Yep. It's also finally enough meat on the bone for their investors to where when they buy it, there's still enough cash flow to make sure they're paying out to their investors and keeping them happy. Anything kind of below that, especially below $1 million, but even like $1.5 million and below, very few times that I've ever come up against a private equity group. And plenty of times, and the cool thing is, because we're self-funded searchers, we can structure deals that are way more favorable to the seller. Whereas a private equity group is going to come in, they're going to do an all-cash deal. Yeah. They're going to put them on an earn-out over the course of 3 years. So the vast majority of the cash is kind of protected to see how performance is.
Got it.
They're going to get those guys to stick on with large seller notes. And so whereas we come in and we can structure a deal where they're pretty much at closing can get up to 90% of the purchase price done, right? Because SBA doesn't even allow earn-outs. So if you're looking at like who's better, yeah, the private equity guys can sometimes transact quicker because they haven't just throw down cash, but the seller's getting a lot less cash at closing than if they were to go.
Okay, interesting. With SB, is there ways around the earnout? Like if they, I guess, the creative finance side of it, if they put some in, or is that hard? Okay,
there's ways around it. You can structure things that are pretty much act as an earnout, but are not technically an earnout.
Yeah. Okay, got it. All right, yeah. Just curious. And When it does come down to this, because I'm sure, again, a lot of our listeners, some of them are in their W-2s thinking about jumping out of their W-2s. Does it matter that somebody has, like when they're doing an SBA loan, that W-2 behind them, or what does the SBA look at specifically?
Yeah, so they're going to look at a couple of things. Yes, it does help when you have it's less than, like, say you're going to get a mortgage, right? Where if you don't have a W-2, it's like super hard to get a mortgage, which is, it's a very crazy thing. But they're looking for a couple of things. One, they're going to have you do a personal financial statement, right? They're going to show, here's all my assets, here's all my liabilities, what is your net worth? They're going to ask for your W-2s if you have them, and they're going to ask for your tax returns. Like, those are the documents they're going to look at to kind of come on and say, hey, here's Ben, here's his PFS, here's his W-2 and tax returns. We're willing to basically pre-qual him up to X for a deal. Now, that is something that's not a hard and fast rule, because at the end of the day, the most important thing in the entire process is the business deal, like the business you're buying. If it's an amazing deal and they're looking at the numbers and they're like, man, this thing is cash flowing like crazy, it's an amazing deal all the way around, they want to do a deal, right? Because they only get paid if they fund a deal. And so you have a lot of leverage. And I try to teach my students this. You have a lot of leverage in this because you're the ones finding the deals. Without you, they got nothing to underwrite, nothing to fund, and they're not making any money at the end of the day. So if you find a great deal, even if you were only pre-qualified for $1 million, but you found a great deal that was $2 million, they're going to look at that deal and they're going to figure out how to get it done where you're the guy. As long as, like, your background, like, everything makes sense and they feel confident that you can be the new owner, they'll make it work.
Interesting. And then where's collateral coming with all this?
Collateral is going to be, so every SBA loan is going to have personal guarantee on it from the buyer. Now, there's a caveat there. If the deal you buy has enough collateral in and of itself that covers the loan, then you obviously wouldn't need a personal guarantee from you. So sometimes that does happen. Like if a deal has a lot of real estate, you've got a lot of equipment, sometimes you can get pretty much up to the point where the collateral inside the deal itself is enough.
Nice.
But most of the time, you're taking out some level of personal guarantee to cover what collateral is needed. Now, I don't know personally the ratio. Every deal that I've done, it seems like it's a different ratio.
Yeah.
Different banks have different thresholds. So but basically, the more, like, if you have real estate in your deal, you have heavy assets in your deal, that helps because it's going to be able to lower the amount of a personal guarantee that the bank is going to get from you, but they will be doing that. And there's tips and tricks to kind of make it to where there's less things they can attach themselves to. But at the end of the day, that is something that they're going to be going for.
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, everything you talk about for a newbie that wants to do this, but has never even looked into it, it can sound overwhelming. How should somebody overcome that mental barrier? Oh my God, this is so much. I can't do this.
And also I want to make it clear, I'm not a guy out, like, I'm not some social media guru who's going to tell you, like, anybody can do it, 3 easy steps. It's going to take, next month you're going to be a millionaire. No, because this is hard. Acquiring a business is a hard thing. And it took me 18 months to do my first deal that I talked about on LinkedIn. And I made a bunch of mistakes in the process with other companies I was making offers on. I lost money. Like, it was, the reason why there's such an opportunity here is because it's such a fragmented market. Anything below that $10 million, or I should say, going back to what I was saying before, the $2 million EBITDA mark, there isn't institutional money here. So this is very much the Wild West. It's a lot of creative financing. There's not much content out there, or books, or certainly not any type of, like, entrepreneurial degrees that focus in on this type of acquisition that we're doing. And so to someone who says, hey, I feel overwhelmed, it's like perfectly normal. I was overwhelmed as well. It is not something that you're going to understand completely in, like, a 5-minute YouTube video. It's not going to happen. Now, going back, what I would say is, think about it this way, that if we're looking at different ways to grow wealth, right? Most people are familiar with the most millionaires have been created through real estate, right? Go out, buy a piece of a cash flowing asset you put a tenant in there, and everyone pretty much can understand how that works. Well, the most billionaires have been created through private equity business acquisition, right? That's how you make the large amounts of wealth quickly. And so everyone knows what businesses are. Everyone buys products all the time. You see that. And I would tell someone who says, I don't have that industry experience, or I've never owned a business before, that businesses are made up of pretty much 3 different factors. You got sales, you got marketing, and you got operations, right? Those are pretty much the 3 different verticals. Now, I will almost guarantee anyone who listens to this, if you look at what you do for a living, it falls into sales, marketing, or operations, right? Because that's what everyone does. And so every business owner out there who started a business from scratch never did it before, right? And you can look at it from this perspective, right? And this is just pure off data. 92% of all businesses that start up within 5 years, they're gone. They fail. Okay. Starting a business and going from 0 to 1 is extremely hard. Now let's take a looking at business acquisition. If we focus on businesses that are older than 5 years, which the SBA is not going to even fund a deal that's less than 3 years old. So typically the average age of the businesses we're looking at is over 10 years old. Mm-hmm. But the business that's over 5 years and utilizes and is acquired through this process has about almost a 95% success rate after the next 5 years. Wow. Okay. And the reason is because you're going after something that's already been proven to work. Right. It already has customers, already has cash flow, already has a team. It already has momentum. It's a train that's moving down the tracks, and you are jumping on top of that train. And you're going to try to make improvements and do things, but it's something that's already has that kind of inertia moving it, right? Whereas you going out there and trying to start from scratch, you got zero inertia, you got zero team, you got zero revenue, and you're working your W-2 job. You're trying to do this in your part-time. Right. It's going to take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of investment to get that to the point of being able to replace the W-2. Whereas if you acquire a business, by the time you close, especially the deals that we're doing, almost 99% of the time that's replacing the income that you had previously, right? So I know it's a lot. There's a lot of moving pieces. That's why I would recommend working with somebody to help guide you throughout that process, who's done it, who's made all the mistakes, right, so that you don't have to make the mistakes, and go that way.
I'm curious, when you say the mistakes, what are like a few of the key mistakes you see people make when they acquire a business?
Yes. Well, great. And I'm a perfect example of this. Not doing due diligence or doing enough due diligence. I think a lot of people they take the broker's word for it. They get these financial statements. Everything looks great. And then that's pretty much where they stop. And they go and they meet everybody. Everyone's saying this is an amazing business. Yeah. And then they transact. And then all of a sudden, 3 months in, they're like, wait, this thing is not making as much money as I thought it was making, right? That's one. The second is, so it's a financial diligence as well as managerial diligence. Understanding how the team structure is in place, how does it work, who's doing what. And so people think, oh, the owner's only working 5 hours a week. This is perfect. And then they get in there and they're working like 30, 40 hours a week, right? Right. And so those are the two avenues where I've learned valuable lessons on, where I've lost lots of money because I did not do the proper diligence, as well as spent lots of time because I did not do the proper amounts of managerial diligence. Yeah. And so those are the things to spend money on. Okay. Do not, even if you have a finance background, find a M&A CPA we work with S&B Diligence, who are awesome at what they do. And they're also very affordable. And they'll come on in and they will basically for the last 3 years, rip everything, bank statements, everything up apart, rebuild a cash analysis. And by the time you're done with it, you have like a 99% surety of, okay, I know exactly how much this thing is making. Right. And typically it's always less than what they say. Right. Yeah. So like that's super important. If you do anything and take anything away from this interview, take that due diligence, pay for it. It's going to save you a lot of money. Believe me.
It makes sense. I like to connect it to real estate. It's like you're not, if you buy a home and you don't do your due diligence on the home, your inspection doesn't happen, and you expect that later on you might turn some things up. So,
yeah, I can wrap my head around the team due diligence, especially, Michael and I come from a deep operation background at Disney and Netflix. So that to me easy. When it comes to the financial part, without actually waiting 6 months to see actual sales come in, how do you validate that the books are actually correct?
Yeah,
forensics.
Yeah, great question. So the way that the CPA that has M&A experience does this is they're going to get the last 3 years of credit card statements, bank statements, and they're going to track every dollar over the last 3 years to show what it ended up being, right? And especially when you have businesses that might be a little more complicated, where there's accounts receivable, right? So there's a cash cycle that's longer. It's not just like service done, service paid. It's 3 months to get that check coming in, right? And so a working capital analysis, because when you start from day one of acquiring the business, you don't have money in the account, right? All the old money that was in the previous checking account, unless you did a stock sale, which most sales are asset sales, you're starting day one, zero debt, $0. So you don't have any of the previous guy's debt. You're a new company, but you're also a new company with zero in your checking account.
Right.
And so let's say that Friday is payroll, and payroll is $15,000. Well, between Monday and Friday, do you have $15,000 of revenue coming in? Maybe not, right? So now what do you need? Oh, you need working capital. And so that's one of the biggest issues. People like buy this business, and yes, it's going to make you $500,000 a year, but when does that $500,000 a year come in?
Right.
It doesn't come in all in the Q4. Is it all in Q1? Is it spread out evenly between all 4 quarters?
And the owner just took all the cash with them.
Yep, exactly. Accounting firms, and a lot of ones, especially the ones that are tax heavy, they make all of it in Q1, Q2.
Yeah.
And they like if you buy it after that, and you have like a big staff and you have a lot of overhead, well, guess what? You're going to be burning cash all the way until the next year. So you have to really have a really good understanding. So what they do is they go through, they make a cash flow analysis, and they basically build up and show you exactly how this thing has performed the last 3 years, where the dips were, what was the cause of the dips. And you're able to then take all that information and say, okay, I feel confident based on now seeing kind of how this thing performed with what's going to happen over the next 6 months. I'm going to put in an error rate of maybe like, plus or minus 5% on this or 10%, and I'm still okay. Okay, I feel good moving forward knowing that. So it takes a lot of analysis on their part.
Yeah. Now I can see why you like accounting firms. This is the what they do.
I'm curious here too. When it does come down to somebody investing in this business, now I know you've done a lot of these. It sounds like most of these, with literally, more of a creative finance kind of a approach to things. Well, what if there's somebody out there right now who's like, you know what though, I have a 401k. I really want to buy a business. Would you say don't do it, or would you say, you know what, there are some good benefits if you use your 401k? Like, what would be your advice on that?
You use 401k funds to buy a business?
Yeah,
totally. And that would be kind of like a Rob's strategy. Yes, like a lot of actually my students are utilizing that. And again, what I tell people is there's in anything in life that's going to give you a great return, there's going to be risk.
It's risk.
Right? And make sure they understand that from day one. There's no free lunch out here. Like there are times where you're going to make a huge amount of money. There's times you're going to make just kind of okay money. And there's times where it could be a disaster. And we're focusing on making sure there's not a disaster. All that we're making sure that that's not the case. And so when someone wants to give their 401k, let's say they got $500,000 sitting in a 401k and they want to use it to buy a business, I'm all for that. What I'll tell them is, look, this is how you would do that. Here's the type of businesses. Follow this structure. Recurring revenue, recession resistance has a very
reduce their risk. Yeah.
Right. We want to get as low risk as possible. Accounting firms, this, that, and other thing. These things are almost gimmies that they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Focus on those. Do not take that 401k and throw it into, the next crumble cookie franchise. Don't do it, right? Like it's a hot item. Maybe the last couple of years, it's not always going to be hot. Don't do it.
Yeah.
So it's just making sure people understand kind of like the mentality upon putting some very safe money. I want to make sure they understand where they should be putting it.
It makes sense. What about in general, both with your business owner experience and your accounting firm experience, tax-wise? Obviously people can use these businesses as their piggy banks, which is also something that I'm sure you'd also say, be careful with how you might approach that. But are there tax benefits that people aren't thinking about when it comes to business acquisition? Yeah,
there is. Like a couple things. I would say in the way that you structure your acquisition. So especially after your first one, I tell people that this is mostly for asset protection, but also for kind of tax benefits. Once you've acquired your first, you're going to want to be, and you might pay yourself as a W-2 salary, put an S election on it, pay yourself as a W-2 salary. One of the best ways to start actually getting some more and more tax benefits is you create a holding company, right? Okay. So holding company up top, right? So it's Ben Kelly Holding Company. Mm-hmm. And I do, let's say 5 acquisitions, all accounting firms, acquisition A, B, C, D, E, right? They're all their own LLCs. They're all owned wholly by the holding company or based on however your ownership percentage is.
Yeah.
And when distributions are made, those distributions are pumped up to the holding company at the top. Mm-hmm. The holding company at the top is now, because it's a holding company entity, you might have a lot of expenses that you can kind of expense out of that holding company, right? Mm-hmm. That kind of count as a holding company expense, but wouldn't really count as one of your A, B, C, D, E accounting firm expenses, right?
Interesting.
And so now you can start writing off some expenses and lowering your taxable taxable exposure
Okay.
by
Interesting.
doing so in a very legal, and this is a very common structure to do. So
Yeah.
I tell people, don't worry about making the holding company right away.
Yeah.
Focus on your first acquisition, get it done. As you're moving forward now and you're thinking about distribution 6 months later, this becomes kind of a great way for you to utilize some of those write-offs and be able to, you pay your salary right out of the holding company to yourself.
Right.
And for me, it's been a great way to structure it. And other than that, I would say that the way you structure the purchase price is also really important. So if you put, let's say it's $1 million purchase,
Yeah.
and you put $500,000 of that million was equipment,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, equipment can be depreciated, right? And so that's very important. A lot of people don't take the time to think through it. They'll be like, okay, it's all goodwill. It's $1 million. It's all goodwill. Well, you're not going to have the tax benefits if it's all goodwill, right?
Yeah.
And so the seller's pushing for their structure in those numbers, right? Because he wants to lower his taxable on the after the sale, and you're kind of fighting as the buyer to have it done on a certain ratio. So normally it's negotiation back and forth. But yeah, there's ways in which you can structure the purchase where you can utilize a lot of depreciation over the next few years to offset the income you're going to be making from this business. And then I would say the holding company structure is a good one too.
Great. Very interesting. Yeah, that's always an area where I think people underutilize tax strategy in general in life at large. So how do you only spend a few hours with each business at this point? I mean, GM sounds like a core structure, but what are you doing specifically? Because you're still you're not somebody who's going to just let it go to the side. You're still paying attention to the things that matter. So what is that?
Yeah. So it all really depends on the deal. Like you just mentioned, I have a lot of GMs in that, for everyone who's listening, general manager, they're the person running the day-to-day, right? So they're making the schedules, they're keeping on top of the employees, they're making sure the service is done to a certain quality. They're the ones hitting all the KPIs. And so a lot of those will then report weekly to either me, if it's one of these businesses, or they're repeating to an operational partner that I brought on.
Okay.
And so for me at this point, my goal now in life is maximize my time. I have no problem. Like right now, I can go out and do my next deal, 100% equity. I own everything, right? No problem. But what does that come? The cost is time, right? And so I would much rather do a deal where I'm a 50% equity owner or even a 30% equity owner. And instead, I'm going to work 1 hour a month on that business and make tens of thousands of dollars a year from the payouts versus 100% equity. I work 20 hours a month and I make triple that, right? And so for me, like that is where the most value for me is. Like I mentioned before we jumped on this call, I have 3 kids, 1 on the way. I want to maximize this time. My kids are all under the age of 5. And I'm only going to have them for a certain amount of time in my life, right? We have 18 years with each one of them before they go off and they do their own thing. And I want to make sure that I am maximizing that time. So for me, maximize my time, be able to structure these deals in a way where I have the most limited amount of interaction after the deal is done. And so that's how I'm kind of structuring, is between a GM as well as with an operating partner now in almost all the deals that I do.
Awesome. So you're optimizing for that. That makes a lot of sense. You'd mentioned something earlier.
I love, by the way. I love.
Right. You mentioned something earlier too, actually, that was interesting, and that's the off-market deal search. I'm curious, how are you approaching that? Because otherwise, I think most people are looking at biz buy sells. I mean, that's really the keying out there, but there's a few other ones, obviously. But how are you approaching off-market?
Yeah, great question. So off-market is where I tell people you're going to get the best deal in terms of the creative structuring, right? So you typically get a lower price, way more seller financing, but it's a ton more work, right? Because you're taking the place of the broker, and a lot of these are mom and pop businesses. They have horrible books, and you're going to spend 3 to 6 months just trying to make sense of what their book said before you can even hand it to a CPA to do the diligence on, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of work. Now, the way we're reaching out to them is typically through cold email. It's the easiest thing to scale, very cheap to get started in. And depending on the industry, you can have a very good hit rate. So for every 100 emails I send out on accounting firms, I'm getting around a 7 to 10% positive response rate. So 7 to 10 of those 100 emails will say, hey, yeah, I'm kind of interested. Maybe let's jump on a call.
Yeah.
And out of that, I'll end up getting probably 1, maybe 2 LOIs written out of every 100 I sent out. Now, a lot of those LOIs are not accepted. It
Yep.
goes back and forth. So now over the course of 1,000 sent out, I will be able to get a deal or two coming through, right?
Yeah.
And so, and CPAs have a much, or accounting firms have a much higher response rate, whereas other industries like landscaping companies, they're not checking their email very often. They're not getting back to you. So it really depends on professional service, white collar versus blue collar,
Okay.
and the way that things are. But
Interesting.
typically, cold email is the first thing because of how much you can scale it.
Yeah.
Cold calling is really good, especially now we're talking about more blue collar. Very good response rates there.
Yeah.
And then door knocking, like literally going to the business in your hometown that you like and walking in as a person and just saying, hey, can I speak to the owner? And hey, my name is Ben and I'm interested in your business. I love your product and I would love to know if you're thinking about selling anytime soon. And just having a conversation like that. And you'd be shocked. Like they're not actively selling, but the second they see that someone's interested, they're willing to have a conversation most of the time.
Sounds so simple. Like, why wouldn't you just walk into the business?
Well, there's one in town here. It's already got my last name on the business. So I'm like, you know what? We're almost there now. So that's, really interesting. Do you normally target though specific areas like when you're doing that, or do you care where they're at?
I do target certain areas. Like there's I make sure I don't target, like if we're looking at the US, I'm really trying to stick out of certain regions and states that are just not friendly to business. So for me, like that's kind of sticking off the West Coast, sticking off that kind of the Northeast, focusing more in the Sun Belt, and areas that are growing with population and they have good demographic growth trends. And kind of sticking away from the places that are kind of bleeding people that are leaving. So that's kind of where I'm.
Okay. That makes sense. So could you tell us a little bit more about Entrepreneur Ace and then also your school community that you have?
Yeah. So Acquisition Ace is a,
Acquisition Ace. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, you're good. Well, everyone's an entrepreneur. So it's to it. So Acquisition Ace is a community that I started about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years at this point. And at the beginning, it was just me trying to find other people out there that wanted to do what I did and kind of just like help each other, right? Where I would kind of tell them about deals I'm working on. They would tell me about their deals. Maybe we partner on deals. It's kind of how it started. And then it just grew to where it is today, which is basically, I'm pretty proud of a product where we have someone who comes in completely green, not knowing anything about acquisitions. And within 6 to 8 months, they're closing on their first deal.
Amazing.
Right. And I'm shooting actually today. And one of the reasons why I got to leave soon is got 2 calls today with students who just closed the last couple of weeks.
That's awesome.
And I'm doing an interview with them. And one bought a skydiving company and the other one bought a commercial cleaning company. And so I'm going to go through that. Awesome stuff. And it's super exciting. And I'll have people that were former teachers. Like we had a former superintendent of schools in New Jersey, bought a commercial pool cleaning company in Myrtle Beach. Killing it. She's on track to do over $350,000 of cash flow her first year.
Amazing.
So you get things like that it just pumps you up. So we have people that have no idea about acquisitions. They're not in private equity. They're not investors. 6 to 8 months later, they come through the program and we're walking them through every single step and giving that encouragement, holding them accountable, and then getting deals done. So that's what Acquisition Ace does. And the school community that you mentioned, that's more of a first. If you're not ready to commit, because once you commit to Acquisition Ace, we're investing in you, we're working with you, it's go time. Like we're going to go do this. If you don't want to commit or you don't have time to commit at this point and you just want to learn a little bit more acquisitions, there's the My First Acquisition community where it's more of a monthly just kind of subscription where you can go in there, you get training, there's some live calls. It's more for people that just kind of don't even know if they're interested in this yet and they want to learn more. Okay.
That makes sense. And then for anybody who's trying to find you, how should they go about doing that?
Yeah, so if you want to find me at so to a couple different places. If you're on YouTube, at Acquisition Ace. If you're on Instagram, if you're on X, if you're on any of the other platforms like that, it's going to be at Ben Kelly 1. So Kelly. So Ben Kelly, and then spell out 1 ONE. And you can find me there. And if you're interested, DM me, and we can go from there.
Cool. We will link to those. Final question: if you had to go back in time and have a conversation with your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
Pertaining to acquisitions or just in life in general?
Let's go life in general.
Okay. I would say the focus. I used to be like most entrepreneurs. I had shiny object syndrome. Chase after every single little thing that sounded cool. and spend a lot of time just spinning my wheels everywhere. I would tell someone, the younger me, hey, you want to be an entrepreneur, you have all this energy, focus at least on something for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
Make a promise to yourself, hit it as hard as you can for 1 year, and then see if you want to continue doing it or not after that point. And so that's probably the biggest thing is if you guys want to do something, give yourself time to do it. Don't have shiny object syndrome. Don't give up after the first couple of weeks because it's hard. If it's hard, it shows you're on the right track, right? Because you just knocked out 98% of people who won't do it because it's hard. So stick with it. And the longer you stick with it, you're going to be in that top 2% that will actually become successful at it. So just stick at it.
Great advice.
On that note, thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, if anybody has questions or comments, just drop them in the comment section below and we'll try to get to all of them. Thank you.